It's the GITA Interviews, the premier global IT solution podcast, where we talk to the CEOs and business leaders who are growing their companies through global partnerships. I'm your host, Emery Geosits, the Executive Director of the Global IT Alliance. Hi, welcome to the GITA Interviews. I'm Emery Geosits, the Executive Director of the Global IT Alliance, and I am joined today from the land down under, which I'm sure he's tired of hearing people say. I won't say anything about Barbie or shrimp or anything like that, but I will introduce my friend Anuj Anand, who's joining us from Brisbane, Australia. Hi, Anuj.
G'day, Emery. So great to meet you. I was hoping you were going to sing that when you said it from the land down under. That's one that I haven't heard yet.
I'm a huge fan of Men at Work, but not today. Nobody wants to hear me sing, I can assure you. So, Anuj, you occupy the role today of CIO of this great organization. Can you tell me a little bit about the organization and what you guys are focused on?
Yeah, of course, mate. And great starting point. I think Ausenco in general has been in the industry for 30 years as of last year. We just celebrated our 30th year.
Wow.
And, pedigree really formed in that mining ecosystem, if you will, so starting from, humble beginnings with 6 people in a small office to, more than 3,000 people, I think, plus minus, on any given Sunday, where we are today with a fair few acquisitions along the way. I love to explain it. I don't know if it's a similar sort of case in the States or around the world, but in Australia, I love to use the analogy when we're here, and I hope this lands correctly, Emery. When you build a block or build a house, you can go to a builder, that does very cookie cutter builds. They'll copy a design and paste it, and you can change a few things internally like walls and things, but the structure and, everything stays the same. However, as soon as it gets complicated, you've got a narrow block of land or, a slope, or it has to be built on a hill or an area that's the soil's not the best. You have to go to a very boutique, builder that's going to think about things differently, not just do that copy paste. Nothing against the competition. They do really well with that sort of model, but that's where Ausenco has really hit its traps when it comes to the mining sector. That real boutique offering with complicated projects. We've built mines on the side of a mountain, higher altitude than Machu Picchu. We've built mines in remote areas of Africa that are really hard to get to. And it's really based on that ethos of finding a better way, coming up with solutions that no one else is going to think about. And that's really where we've got to where we have. And, Ausenco in essence is an engineering, procurement, construction management company. So we'll build the mine as a builder would build a house and hand over the keys. We'll help get to that point. There is some maintenance aspect of things occasionally that we would look at, but most of the time, we'll get to that point and hand over the keys, and we do that really, really well for what it's worth.
That, just the way you described it, I think the analogy is perfect. How exciting to go to parts of the world that, it really takes some talent to achieve what you're achieving, especially from a bespoke kind of perspective. That's a great way to describe it. I appreciate that. And of course, the nice part is you work with not 1, but 2, and soon to be 3 and 4 of the GITA partners. So I know that you've worked with Data3 for a very long time and CompuGen in Canada. I think you lived in Canada, in Vancouver for a while. Is that right?
That is right. Loved it. Some part of me misses the cold and 30-degree, I can't convert to Fahrenheit off the bat, but 30-degree warm, humid days over here, and watching the snow reports in Canada I do crave that back. But I lived in Canada, I'd say, out of the last 12 years, I've been there for about 8.
Wow.
So back and forth a bit, but spent a fair bit of those informative learning years in Vancouver.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it doesn't matter the conversion of Fahrenheit or Celsius because it's just warmer than everywhere we are in the U.S. right now. So
Yes,
it's a little
perfect. Yes, that's
chilly.
a great way to put it.
Exactly. It's a little chilly right now. So let's dive right in. You know, you're very engaged and you've been very progressive from an IT perspective. Tell me a little bit about how your role and how IT plays a part in this incredible industry you're in.
Yeah, look, a broad question, and I'll try, answering, from the start, I guess,
Sure.
from the role and, how it evolved to, where we are now and where
Great.
we sort of think about technology and IT and what we've really done, so my background, and sometimes, we might talk about this in the questions that I saw, Emery, but I do still have that imposter syndrome, coming into IT because my background actually started from the floor at Ausenco. I started off, now everyone's going to know it, but, after this gets out, I started as a instrumentation engineer
Wow.
at Ausenco, and when was it? 2006, 2007,
Wow.
and still have that mindset. Ausenco was still growing to be that, people were starting to talk about it as that really innovative company doing some great things, some complicated projects, and using new systems and technologies. And that was the draw card to the organization initially. Apart from the fact that, as part of this transition from a graduate engineer to a engineer was the financial benefits of it, obviously, as shallow as it sounds, but
No,
yeah,
fully
there
understand.
was, yeah, as a graduate, it makes a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so it was interesting, and the moves paid dividends. I've always thought about things that I learned through that career and through that growth of finding a better way. In everything that we did. Whether it was in instrumentation engineering, using new technologies, using the latest and greatest, or using what was available, but finding a better way to use it. Technology seemed to be the um, most reliable source to develop that efficiency, or
Sure.
the way that, to kind of challenge the status quo and not just go, well, just because we did this for the last 5 years, or how you did things, some of the senior engineers may have done things. I actually always came in with that thought process, and there's got to be a better way to do this. I'm not
Hmm.
going to sit down and manually go through and look at a drawing and then enter data on a data sheet um, about 12,000 times.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I, yeah, came up with better ways of doing things constantly. And, I think that that in essence did pretty well for me. And at some point of time, our CTO and CEO and Chief HR Officer saw a few of the successes that we had in the project space, that I was working on, and in 2015 asked if I wanted to be part of IT. And typical answer to start off with, I was like, oh, I don't know about being in IT. They tend to be a bit of a barrier
Right.
to the progress, right? At the time it was like, oh, you can't do this, you can't have access to this
A lot of
server, you
no's.
can't
Right.
do this. You know how it is, right, Emery?
Yeah,
It's
for
like,
sure.
nope, yeah, yeah. And you got to have admin access to do this. And the answer I got was really interesting in the why I didn't want to be part of IT at the time. And they said, well, why don't you change some of that? If that's the reasoning. And that hung true. And it's the mindset that I've had from the start, moving into a director of IT role and then building up to a VP role. So I think the consensus at the start was, look, we've got a different thought process for you to, maybe within 10 years, might be earlier, but, this was 2015, 2016. Um, think about the CIO track versus, an engineering manager. I was always part of a leadership track within the organization, and something that Ausenco does really well is, personally, as an example and living case study, but, across the board, is identify some talent very early on and develop
Sure.
that.
Sure.
And that was the offer on the cards, on the table. And I decided to jump in, and obviously instead of the 10 years, managed to get to that CIO role within 4 to 5 years, which means I did something right
Yeah, for
at the
sure.
time.
For
Yeah.
sure.
And yeah, so we've taken that mindset and that challenge to really be part of the business versus the barrier. That you don't have permission to do this. We spend a lot of time, and given the experience, some of my team also have industry experience, started from the floor,
Yeah.
if you will,
Yeah.
to get to that point. So we litmus test almost every project that we do, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's the latest in cybersecurity, which often misses the litmus test. But
Right.
a lot of
Right.
the time when it comes to improvements, it's what difference is it going to make to what we do every day? And that's what we really test constantly.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at. Hopefully
Yeah.
that gave you the answer that you were looking for. I know it's
No,
pretty
no,
broad.
no. It absolutely did. It absolutely did. And that's a really interesting journey. The thing I'm most impressed about what you said is the idea that IT has a seat at the table within the organization in the decision-making process. So you don't see that in a lot of organizations. It's usually potentially an afterthought or not something that is prominent. But I'm glad to know that you've managed to get that seat at the table in the decision-making process for the company, and that's pretty impressive. Thanks for sharing that. There's two letters that you run into everywhere these days, and you could just be at Starbucks and people are talking about AI. I'm assuming, knowing what I know about the industry and what you've described so far, and from our partners, that AI is a potential big player in what you guys do. Can you talk a little bit about that? Do you see a future there for AI in your industry?
100% Emery, and I think it's an area probably every event, every session that we're in, is brought up very, very consistently. Um, Something that we've stayed quite cognizant of over the years is, testing what's the buzzword, and
Right.
like, is this a buzzword right now? Like everywhere you go, everyone's talking about AI, ChatGPT, amazing use cases, really, really great at what they do.
Right.
We've had that mindset, we were early adopters in the cloud in 2012, 2013. We actually embarked on an AI journey in 2019, 2020. We actually ran three projects in parallel, which were fully AI based, probably with the leader in AI in essence at the time. The bot basically beat Jeopardy. I'm not going to take its name, but
Yeah.
try to stay away from names, but we know who we're talking about.
Sure.
And, so we ran through three projects at the time, and we learned from each one of those. What we learned was AI at the time required a fair amount of investment for business use cases to be successful.
Sure.
So I can tell you the project that we ran through, one of the projects that was a litmus test for us was around, you could call it a contract analyzer. So if you think about the amount of contracts that we would get in that need to comply with our standard terms and conditions, what contract analyzer would do would actually go through, absorb the contract and go through and tell you what was Ausenco standard term and condition, non-compliant. I guess the simplest one would be payment terms. Our standard's 45 days end of month. This contract that's come in is 30 days end of month. Non-compliant requires a change. We kind of ran that through the gauntlet, spent a fair bit of time. We actually needed to get our legal team involved to go through the contracts, plus someone from the digital team to make sure that we've got the right people in place. And it took us almost a year to run through that and get it up and running with 5 terms of 5 clauses. To actually make it a successful use case, we would have to get anywhere between 20 to 30 theoretically,
Wow,
to make it a successful product. And again, taking into account that there's a fair element of risk when it comes to legal contracts.
Sure,
right?
considerable,
to make sure,
yeah.
And to run that through and spend a year, I guess we answered the question. Yes, it's possible. Yes, there is reality in this space.
Right.
The second thing that we answered was to get it to be successful does take a fair amount of investment, just not from a capital perspective, but key resources
Yeah.
from the business.
And you were an
Which means
early
taking,
adopter. Like,
yeah,
it was early.
yeah, and taking them away from the day job. Now,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
fast forward 4 years, I think there's so many of these platforms that, are available off the shelf that would probably get us 70% of the way there. I think so it's that step away from purpose-built AI to rules-based AI. So we're still well within the space. We've got our large language model. We're approaching some of our service tickets, within the, level 1, level 2, tier 1, tier 2 service tickets, using AI, in a chat bot, the large language model, doing that quite well. We've had that for about 5 months now, and the uptick in the amount of tickets being resolved is quite successful. So it's an interesting use case in AI, and we're still with it. We're still looking at opportunities to use it effectively for some more innovative projects. We've seen, when we compare and sit down with our peers, our clients, there's appetite for it to be used. And there's some of and you'd be seeing this as well, Emery. I'd love to hear your point of view as well, but you'd be seeing this, where there is the requirement and the need to test it out and spend the time. And, I was speaking to one of the big oil and gas companies over here and their CIO, and they said they're going to run about 100 projects and hopefully one of those is going to be successful.
Amazing.
And this was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So you can see that happening across the place. We're a bit more practical. We're not going to run 100 projects, but we are going to run like 3 or 4 and see which ones are successful.
Yeah.
And, make sure that those are the ones that are going to make a massive difference to that bottom line.
Yeah, for sure. And you hit the nail on the head with the risk aspect, right? 100 projects is a little crazy and aggressive. Your approach is a little more measured. I'm finding that I don't know if everyone knows they have to do something around it. Whether or not they've figured out what that is for their particular industry is a different story. But I think we're at the infancy stage of something incredible. So it's kind of fun to watch and be aware of what you're watching as it grows. So it really is incredible. So we'll see how that takes off. I tend to think with the amount of data that you see in what you do and the critical infrastructure parts of what you do, the next big thing for you, and you touched on it a little bit, is cybersecurity. How do you secure with vast amount of sites and employees and your overall IT infrastructure? What is your security practice or best practices around it?
Yeah, look, it's probably the one where I think we spoke about this when you were here as well, Emery. It's probably the area that we've had to learn the most about.
Right.
We've got some really great resources, and for myself, having to spend a fair bit of time learning about what's out there and what the threats are and where we should be investing to overcome and make sure that we protect the perimeter. And so it's a broad question, and broad answer to that question, I think, is across the geographies that we operate in and across the sites that we operate in, the first and most important thing that comes to mind is training employees. I think that's probably the starting point for any good cybersecurity plan or strategy, is
because that's also the starting point for your biggest breach.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. It's the one area, and it's probably the hardest one to control, and as much as we go through training programs, we spend plenty of time sitting down. It is an area of risk because you could have new people come in, and I think the example that you get, and we talk about within the tech space all the time, is someone plugging in a USB unknowingly, right? Not that it is possible anymore, but a lot of organizations, it is possible to still do that.
Sure.
The other area, I think that organizations and that, you have to consider spending a fair bit of time in is backups, right? Like, we had a chat with the FBI cybersecurity specialist a couple of years ago, and they spoke about constantly, like in their messaging, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when
For sure.
you get breached, right? Like constantly, on almost all of their slides, and through the presentation, it was like this, in inverted commas, typical scare tactic, yes, but also in a way true, right? Like and the amount you can spend, and this is a bit of a personal view, but I feel like the amount you can spend in cybersecurity now is, you can keep going, but what I need to stay cognizant of and other CIOs need to stay cognizant of is that balance, right? Like, when is that number more than what you're trying to protect?
Very
right? Like,
true.
is it 10 million? Is it 50 million?
Right.
At some point in time, you've got to have to make that call and explain to the board that, this is what the decision is, right? Like, I'm going to spend whatever X amount of money protecting the crown jewels, but, I'd rather invest on backups and, 3 tiers, 4 tiers, 5 tiers, whatever that number is, because there will be a point of time when it happens, but, as long as we can restore within a certain period of time, we should still be okay versus spending that amount of capital.
That's a great point, because, at some point you got to leave something to chance, because you can't keep throwing money at the problem. It's clear that money doesn't solve the problem always. I think oftentimes about the breach at the Target stores here in the US, one of the largest breaches we've ever had, and the illicit party went in through the HVAC system, which I'm sure they never thought would be the path to wiping out Target's customers' credit cards, and there it was. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. There is a infinite amount of money, but those decisions are important and have to be made. Thank you for that. So just changing gears a little bit, you mentioned Machu Picchu and some other locations that are super remote. Tell me a little bit about how you, if you do even, manage your IT organization, your infrastructure with those kind of remote sites around the world.
Yeah, look, so a lot of the remote sort of sites that we have, tend to be client infrastructure, even though we might have, some of our infrastructure on those various sites. If we're doing some commissioning work, we do set up, our own servers, especially to transfer large join files. Used to be very, very complicated, so it used to be, even if I go back to 2 years ago, Emery, where we actually had the back and forth where people were, doing their rotations, and we had key personnel that we would actually send. We had 2 NAS drives, and we would actually send it back and forth, like with the latest information, on their rotations.
Right.
So, because connectivity at site a lot of the time tends to be quite poor, used to be quite poor, but, over the last year and a bit, again, with the evolution of tech, Starlink, other permutations and combinations of that site connectivity has gotten leaps and bounds better, and the ability to share data back and forth has gotten a lot better. So, even with some of the remote sites, even with the particular one in question right now, where we were flying the drives back and forth, 10 times better. We're just, plug and play. So we've actually got a setup where we're sending files back and forth, and they're getting the latest information there. They're making updates. We're seeing them in the office. It's gotten a lot better. It even gets better, right? Like, when we're talking about innovation and new technologies and being on the front foot, we've got sites where you can actually wear glasses with the camera, and someone in the office can see what you're seeing and help with issues, right? Like, you could be seeing a transmitter and seeing a configuration on an indicator, and someone in the office is looking at that with you, able to pull up a data sheet on the side and say, all right, look, I can see on the data sheet while you're looking at that the temperature condition or the level condition needs to be X versus Y,
Amazing.
right? Like,
Right.
so maybe
Right.
you should change this. And those are the things that, not the norm across everywhere, but, the areas that I feel we're going to be looking at because of that connectivity improvement, because now we can actually start taking advantage of these improvements versus what it was before, where, if you tried this technology back, even a couple of years ago, Emery, it would be more along the lines of, where it'd be choppy connection,
Oh
like people
yeah, it wouldn't
physically
be
trying to have
right. Right.
and now it's gotten 10 times better. So definitely an area we're going to put in some grunt into, and having walk-through sites. We've got the drones going, that are providing
Sure.
feeds twice a week, at certain areas and sites. So continuing to lead that charge. Great toys, but also some good results coming from it in the
Yeah.
practical aspect of it.
I consult with a company. It's actually a safety construction company out of New York. And the glasses have changed their industry. So rather than having to send someone on site, you've got the cameras, you've got everything else, and you have a safety engineer back in the office watching everything getting filmed from the individual's glasses, and they're able to assess the situation, make recommendations, et cetera. So yeah, really interesting technology out there to help those industries for sure.
Yeah.
As we come to a close, there's a couple of things that I wanted to ask you about. In particular, we talked about AI, but is there a technology, is there something in our industry that's coming that you're excited about, that you want to get your hands on, or if you have your hands on it, you see the progression of it? Is there anything you'd like to highlight that you see in the industry that could be another game changer?
Look, I do think one area that we're constantly looking at is something that we touched on briefly, with the drones and trying to bring. I spoke about it recently, and trying to bring what's going on at site into the offices is, starting to get to that area where we're really merging geographies, and I think we saw a bit of it with the whole work from home through the pandemic, and that genesis of everyone, starting to really blur those lines. For us, I'm thinking that it's going to go a level further where, instead of flying X amount of people to site on rotations, we're going to start blurring those lines a bit more. And that's what I'm excited about, where we spoke about the glasses and the construction industry
Yeah.
kind of leading that charge, which tends to be, when it comes to our space in the mining space, an area that we look at, or I look at constantly, is to see what's going on there and what successes they've had, because
Sure.
we can apply a fair bit of that within our industry as well. But, that's an area, apart from the AI piece, that I think is going to happen, and there's a lot of investment and talk about it. I feel the area that we're going to really see some progress in, and the genesis, is around meshing and blurring those lines with site versus home. And companies are really starting to leverage this. Like, you look at the likes of, in Santiago, I know Honeywell's doing some great work, BHP's doing some great work with IROC, which is fully where they're trying to get to, is like remote site operations. So instead of, I can't remember the exact factor, but instead of sending X amount of people to site, they've reduced that number significantly, with people sitting in offices looking at large monitors and screens. So they're starting to leverage that a bit more. Like, obviously autonomous vehicles is a big advancement in that area. And we're going to continue doing some good work in that space, because I still think that that's going to be the next innovation and disruption to a certain level within our industry.
Yeah, it's exciting to live through all of this. So I know you have. Do you have two little kids? Two children?
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, I remember talking about that. So my last question for you today is, with your little ones, is there some event, some vacation, something you're looking forward to in the not too far off future that is really keeping you motivated at work?
That's a great question, and definitely the curveball onto it. So we're actually, I think that there's two things I could tell you about. So we're going away this weekend to the beach, which is up the coast. So we're spending a weekend away, which we love doing and tend to do it as much as we can.
Great.
Given the Australian beaches and what's available
Jealous.
at our doorstep.
Jealous.
Yeah, really close. But we are planning, if it all falls into place, a trip to Spain this year.
Great.
So there's a fair few things that need to fall into place for it to happen.
Sure.
But fingers crossed and putting it out into the world, manifesting that it does, and not the other way.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Really, we've been not confined by any means, but it's been a busy 2023 and leading up to it. So this is going to be that really exciting point and break that we're looking forward to.
That's fantastic. If you need anywhere between 5 and 30 recommendations for restaurants in Barcelona, I'm your guy. It's one of my favorite
Emery,
places on the planet.
I'm going to take you up on that.
Please do.
As soon as we start locking anything in, I will definitely hit you up.
Please do. If there's one thing I know, it's food. That's for sure. Anuj, this has been a pleasure. I thank you so much. I hope you have a great Friday there. I thank you very much for joining me today. This has been the GITA Interviews. For more information, contact GITA at www.gita.com. Thanks and have a good day. Thank you for listening to the GITA Interviews. To find out more about the Global IT Alliance, please visit www.gita.com or follow us for more great interviews.